Hey there, welcome in or welcome back. My name is Avril, and in this corner of the internet, we chat about writing, life, and whatever else comes to mind. Today's video is a little bit different. I have a crazy week this week, and unfortunately, that means that I am not able to wrangle enough time to sit down and record a proper video the way that I prefer to. So what I've decided to do is I'm just doing a little bit of a voiceover over the footage used in my little 30-minute writing sprint video from last week. Hopefully that's okay. I admit that I do a lot of my YouTube viewing actually as in the background as I'm doing other things. And maybe that's the case for you if you're watching this video or any other videos that I've posted here on the channel. And we're just going to make it work for this week. A few weeks ago, I uploaded a vlog which included me getting feedback on my writing from my writing group. And while I haven't been able to sit down and actually implement any of their critiques and feedback into my current work in progress, I have been able to let their feedback marinate, as I like to say, and to put together a little bit of a game plan for when I am back to working on this project on a more consistent basis. While I was going over everybody's feedback, there were definitely patterns that kept coming up, things that were highlighted multiple times. And these are things that I refer to as my first draft pitfalls. These are things that, for whatever reason, I keep doing, even though I know they're an issue. I know that they keep happening in my first drafts. These are things that I am relatively cognizant of, but for whatever reason, I haven't quite found the way to work around them in a way that makes sense for me. They're usually things that will get fixed in a second draft and onward. And this goes back to when I was a teenager working on a historical project that at one point capped off at 180,000 words and is never going to see the light of day for a lot of reasons, but including these pitfalls that continue to pop up even now as I'm 30 and working on, I think, probably my seventh book. Even though right now it does feel like book has to be in air quotes for this project. I'm currently in a weird limbo phase where I have most of the pieces, they just haven't fallen into place yet. And I think a lot of that is because I keep falling into these pitfalls. And even though I am more aware of these pitfalls being a thing in my writing, that doesn't mean I've gotten better at resolving them in the moment. As for why I wanted to do a video on my pitfalls, it's not to necessarily offer a solution for resolving them because, let's be honest, if I knew how to resolve these pitfalls, I wouldn't keep tripping into them. It's more that when I hear another writer talking about their shortcomings or things they struggle with in their own writing, it's really encouraging because, it's a sign that I don't have to be perfect on the first draft and that I'm not the only one struggling with these writing things. But it can also be helpful because maybe they mentioned something that I didn't realize was a pitfall of my own. And maybe I mentioned something that is also prevalent in your writing, so you know to keep an eye out for it going forward. And the other thing I'll mention before I get into my own pitfalls is that if I mention something that you are super duper great at in your writing, please feel free to leave me tips down in the comments and turn it into a space where we can all learn from each other. Because I do want this channel to be kind of a space where we can connect and talk about writing and talk about our projects and learn from each other. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first pitfall on the list is interiority. And this is something that I have struggled with for so long. I think it comes from misinterpretation of show don't tell being drilled into my head, and that it's usually better to leave your character's feelings and thoughts up to interpretation on the reader's part. The thing that I was not understanding about interiority is that it's not telling the reader that the character felt sad versus telling the reader that the character's eyes had a red tinge to them and that they were surrounded by gray circles and that they stung. So for the longest time, I would completely avoid any form of internal monologue in my narration because I had kind of roped it into the same vein as saying he felt sad because ... The thing about interiority is that it is in many ways kind of like giving your reader an aside with that character and cluing them into things that they may not otherwise be privy to. It helps strengthen that bond with the character, it gives them a little more insight, and that is especially important when you're working in a first person project where you are in that character's head for the duration of the story. I will say that I think I have a better understanding of why interiority matters, but that doesn't mean I necessarily know how to write it. And a large part of that improved understanding does come from Jill Barrett's book, Just Stabbing Now, which, if you're unfamiliar, follows a writer working on her fantasy novel and includes pieces of that novel. And basically, the writer character, Caroline, will have these one on one conversations with her characters that are basically a back and forth of what do you want? What are you thinking? No, what do you really need right now? And kind of that working through interiority and figuring out deep down what really matters to her characters in that moment. And that's something that I've been trying to implement in my own writing and being able to have those one on one conversations with my own characters to get to the heart of what matters to them in that moment, in that scene, what they want, and what they're thinking and feeling. So, one of the things that I do want to work on more as I go on with this draft and go back and polish up the first 3 chapters is really focusing on honing in on my characters and building that interiority because it does matter. It does have a purpose, and there are ways to definitely write it without veering off into the territory of telling. Pitfall number 2 may come as a surprise if you happen to catch my video about why I DNF'd books this year, because pitfall number 2 is actually one of those reasons, and it is something that I am prone to doing in my first drafts as well. And that is having too many characters to keep track of, specifically having too many characters introduced early on. So, one of the things that got pointed out to me is that I have a habit of throwing out too many character names for my readers to really keep track of because they don't know who these people are. So, for a little bit of context, Project Scrimmage is a football romance, and Liam is on a fictional NFL team. And the first time we meet Liam, he is on a bus traveling with his teammates. And while he would be on a first name basis with all these characters, and they all live rent free in my head, my reader knows absolutely none of them. So there were definitely times where I think the pacing got a little jumbled because you would have that pause of, okay, wait, which one is Trent? Who is DeMarcus? Who the heck is Miles? Where did Miles go? And that's in part because one of my other issues that I have with characters is that because I have so many characters that I'm introducing early on, it ends up being that a character I've just introduced ends up kind of fading into the background because I'm making room to introduce another character. And the reader might forget who that first character was. So the way I've kind of come to look at that is like you're arriving at a party and you don't know anybody else there, but they've all known each other since forever. You know, they've all been best friends since kindergarten. And you're just dropped into this. You're trying to figure out the dynamics and who everybody is, and that can get really overwhelming. Whereas if you're introducing one character, giving your reader enough to go on and then introduce another character, and you keep that cast size smaller, it makes it easier for your reader to connect with all of them. You know, in its current state, I can't expect them to know Miles from DeMarcus. And that can also kind of turn my characters into something between a floating head and an amorphous blob, where my reader cannot tell them apart because I haven't spent enough time giving them really any distinguishing features. They just exist as names. So going forward, I definitely need to focus more on a select few of characters as opposed to having these big casts and giving my readers too many characters to get acquainted to at once. So you have characters like Giles in Entitled Love or Trent in Project Scrimmage, where they are the fan favorite, at least among my writing group, and characters like Thomas or Liam are just kind of like, eh, you know, because they don't know enough about them. Kind of goes back to what I was saying about interiority, where I'm not giving my main characters enough substance for my readers to latch onto. I definitely need to be more mindful of how many characters I'm introducing at any given time and giving my readers enough time to acclimate and get acquainted with these characters before I introduce another cast member. But also being able to kind of assess where it might be more beneficial to the story as a whole to cut a character and assign their role to another character who has more importance on the story. And I will have my blog post about cutting characters from your story linked down in the description of this video if you want to give that a read. Pitfall number 3 is actually one that surprisingly wasn't that big of an issue with Project Scrimmage, but has been an issue for me in the past and is therefore worth mentioning. And that is the White Room. In terms of writing fiction, the White Room refers to times where your setting descriptions may be a bit lacking and your characters end up floating in this blank void in your reader's mind, also known as the White Room. The white room tends to be something that I do struggle with early on. I think because in general, I tend to be a very dialogue focused writer. Meanwhile, any grounding details like the setting or again, interiority tend to be a second draft thing and something that comes later. And that is more related to my natural inclinations as a writer. I think that's also because when I'm picking out a book to read, I'm very character focused and I'm more interested in the character dynamics. But this was a pitfall that was pointed out to me when I was in college. I got to do an independent study for a semester where I was editing a manuscript that I was working on at the time. Again, that 180,000 word behemoth project. One thing that I did pick up from that independent study as far as setting description goes is identifying one or two defining features of your setting through the eyes of your POV character. What kind of things do they notice? How do they feel about it? Because that can really help with perception in your reader's mind and kind of help them visualize things through the lens of your character. And that can really help with grounding the reader because it already establishes that connection between them and the POV character. So, because they're kind of seeing things the same way and having a similar experience, it really helps kind of forge that bond. There have been plenty of times where I'm writing a first draft and I catch myself asking the question, am I lingering long enough? Am I getting cozy in this character's head? Am I giving enough detail through their perception? And there are times where I'm editing that first draft and I realize that I need to do more lingering and spend a little more time on those smaller details that really bring the setting to life. So again, it's not the deepest first draft pitfall for me anymore, but it is still one that I trip into now and then. Anyway, those are just a few of those pitfalls that I tend to fall into on a first draft and those little mistakes that I do keep making, even though I am fully aware of them. I think a lot of it is just the kind of writer that I am, and because I'm gradually embracing my pantser side where I've kind of given up on outlining altogether and I'm just kind of chasing the vibes. There are definitely things that might be skipped over or aren't explored in as great a depth as they could be. But that is what revisions are for. That is what draft two and onward are for. And I do think that with every first draft that I've written over the years, with every new project there's been, those pitfalls do become a little bit shallower and easier for me to circumvent because I do know they're there and that one way or another, I will find a way to bridge that gap or fill in that hole and just keep going. But that is where I'll be cutting the video off for today. And like I said at the top of the video, this is not my usual way of doing things. Life just kind of got in the way this week, and hopefully everything will peter out once we get into September. I'm already making plans for the channel and my blog and my writing and getting myself back on track. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. I do want to say thank you to everyone that's been here and has been hanging out with me in this corner of the internet. We just crossed 50 subscribers, which is crazy to think about. And I am so glad you guys are here and hope we can continue to build this little community here in this corner of the internet. The other thing I'll mention is that down in the description of this video, I will have my social media as well as my blog, which I am really bad about promoting. I've actually had this blog going on 8 years now. It'll be 8 years in December. I'm just really bad about talking about it. So that'll be down below as well. Feel free to pop over there, give me a read, and check out everything. But until then, take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you here in the next one. Bye.